And that's where we get into this whole conversation about temptation, because temptation is typically to do something that is not wise.
Yeah.
And so you can be in situations with friends, and honestly, I think sometimes even good friends that are just making poor choices, where they're asking you to do something that is not going to be a wise decision. It reminds me of magnets. If you've ever held magnets together and they're attracted to each other, the closer you put the magnets to each other, the more you feel that pull.
Right.
And it's grabbing each other and it's bringing you in closer.
Yeah.
I think that's the same with temptation. You know, when you're standing really far off from temptation, it's easier to say no. But the closer you get to it, the more it does look fun, and maybe nobody will find out. But everybody else is going to get to do it, and then I'm not.
Yeah.
That temptation starts to suck you in. So it's really trying to help our kids see, if you'll just stand back from it, you can say no much easier than if you're, just like with the bridge, standing on the very edge.
That's really good. I love
of that cliff. Hello, moms. I am here today to welcome you to the Gather Moms podcast.
Wow, that was a very different intro than we've ever done.
I felt the need to switch it up.
Okay,
and
great.
Just as the air is changing, so is our intro.
Wow. You feel... Okay, so you're wearing your teacher clothes today because you were at school, and it feels like that might be a little bit of your teacher voice.
It might be. I'm a pretty fun teacher, though. I don't know that I talk quite like that, but
I bet you are fun.
I am in my teacher clothes, and I have had a whole day of teaching.
Yeah.
So I really hope that the words that I'm about to speak in this podcast make sense.
No, I know. We both are coming in hot. I worked today, and so, Mom, whatever you're doing as you're sitting here listening to us doing this, just know we are just kind of flying by the seat of our pants. Nobody has this figured out. What you get here is very authentic.
They love us for it, though.
I
It
hope
makes
so.
them feel like they're in a room of friends.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so we're in our series, Mama Said, and we're talking about the things that our moms said to us and that we say to our kids. And this is 100% something that I heard growing up. But I don't know if I've actually said it to my kids.
Okay.
Okay. If your friends jumped off a bridge, would you?
Okay, and can we talk about, I have always heard it, if your friends jumped off a cliff, would you?
Oh, you heard a cliff.
Yeah.
That sounds way more like traumatic than a bridge.
Bro, I don't know. People do jump off of cliffs like into the ocean. People jump off of a bridge to like...
Don't say it.
Excuse me? Excuse me. That is what is... It's not a good...
I imagine a lovely little red bridge over a river. That looks fun.
Sure.
That's in the shelter world.
Okay, that's not what I picture. But anyway.
Okay, so years ago, we went on a whitewater rafting trip with my mother-in-law up in Colorado. And I remember they took us to a place with this giant cliff. And they say, okay, we're going to walk up to the top of the cliff. And if you want to jump off, you can.
Yeah.
And I was like, immediately, no, I'm not doing that.
I am immediately yes.
I'm out.
Okay.
But Greg, my husband, and then both of my boys, and I'm trying to remember, I think Jake was probably 10, and so that makes Judd 7. They were both like, yeah, we'll do it. So they get up there, and I'm pretty sure Jake chickened and would not do it. And I think that Greg made Judd go first. And that 7-year-old stepped up to the edge of that cliff and just walked off it like it was nothing.
Yeah.
And then when Greg did it, he said, oh my gosh, I think I could have died. And I sent my son off ahead of me. So there are people jumping off cliffs somewhere.
Okay, I only feel good jumping off a cliff if it's like you've seen other people already jumping off the cliff into the same spot. And it's like they didn't hit anything and they look fine. So I could probably do that too. When I was growing up, we would go sailing. And we would sail over to this spot that had a waterfall, and you would have to climb to the top of this, I'm not going to say mountain, because we're in Texas, so it's not a mountain.
Well, when you say waterfall, it makes me think of Hawaii. Are we talking about legit waterfall?
I mean, I'm going to have to find you a picture. It's like Belton.
So, I know Belton. Okay.
But you still are climbing to the top of this thing.
Yes.
And then, and you have to like walk along the side of, I'm putting in quotation marks, mountain. I can't think of what else you would call it.
It's Belton. This is a hill.
But it's a cliff. It's a mountainside. And you climb up to the top and then you jump off.
Yes.
And
were you scared?
No.
And people did it. That was like the thing to do.
Yeah. And then, growing up, like we would go tubing and down the Guadalupe and stuff. And people are jumping off the side of that into the river all the time.
We didn't do that in the bubble. We did not do any of those things. No.
I will tell you, though, we were at the river 2 summers ago, and they have all these rope swings, and so kids will jump off rope swings and jump into the river, and the more they do it, the braver they get of like, what tricks can I try?
Oh yeah, let's do a flip.
I'm doing this. And so we're watching these kids try all these different things, and this boy goes and he's climbed way up on the rope, and maybe he's gonna flip coming down, and as he comes down, the rope catches around his ankle. I
so
cannot
even
jumps, tell you, it just holds him.
Oh
so
my
he's
goodness.
dangling there, and seriously, it was by the grace of God that child did not hit his head.
Yes.
On the stone embankment.
Right, coming back at it.
No, it was a terrifying situation. All the adults anywhere around just rushed to and then you had to hoist him to get the thing off the.
Yes.
So there is some wisdom in if all your friends jumped off a bridge with you or a cliff, maybe that's not a good idea.
I feel like parents use that to scare us. Don't do what all your friends do.
Well, yeah, because the point is, if they're all doing something dumb, don't do something dumb.
Right.
But we still do that.
Yes. And that's kind of, I think, what the whole point of this mama said phrase was. Is it really has to do with peer pressure and temptation. What are you getting yourself into? That was probably a foolish decision to make.
Okay, so when I was in high school, and this is going to be a mix of oh, that's kind of sweet, and also really dumb. All right, so after I kind of had a rough freshman year where I was making bad choices, but then I switched back to my good friend group.
Okay.
And we would, on a Saturday night, go to a friend's house and play spades.
I played spades in high school.
You did?
What? That means I was part of the cool crowd.
Oh, excuse me.
I'm so excited.
So there would be 25 of us.
Oh, I didn't have that many friends.
And we would do a tournament. I mean, it was a lot. So then we decided, it was, probably 10 o'clock at night, that we were going to go down to the park down the road and go swinging. And it's one of those big swings.
Yes.
And I think it had 8 swings on it or something, So we're all leaving, all the boys, and it's maybe a couple miles down the road. So all the boys jump in the guy's truck, and they're all in the bed of the truck. And all of us.
That's also very unsafe.
I know, but it was, 1999.
If all your friends got in the bed of a truck, would you?
Yeah, you would have. In the 90s, nobody was asking questions about that. It was a very normal thing. We were also toilet papering houses, which.
Okay, I did do that. Yes, I did.
All right. So, anyway, so we jumped in my girlfriend's convertible. And then
with the top down?
Well, yes. And then what we did was not a great choice, because then there's 2 people in the regular seats and then 3 people in the back seats and then 3 of us sitting up on the.
Kate.
I know.
Do you know how many things could go wrong?
Listen. Okay. So we're getting to the park. We're about to pull into the park, and the boys they're jumping out of the truck and they're running toward the swing sets.
Yes.
And I'm a little bit competitive.
Uh-huh.
So I'm they cannot get to the swing sets before me.
Where are you sitting in the convertible?
Up on the top of the thing.
Okay.
So as she's pulling into the parking lot, and she's about to pull into a spot, and I just think, well, I'm going to go ahead and jump out, and so I can run over and beat the boys, and so that I get a spot on the swing. Well, so I jump out of the moving car. I don't know if you know this. You might just want to tuck this little piece of wisdom away, but if you ever have to jump out of a moving thing, an object in motion remains in motion, right? I think that's inertia, momentum.
Okay. I did not teach that in school today, so I do not know.
Okay. Well, but that's a fact of the laws of science.
Physics.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that didn't compute with 16-year-old Kate. So I jump out of this moving vehicle and try and stand.
Oh, but you can't.
So you can't stand.
Right.
So you immediately just you hit the ground and then you just start rolling on the asphalt.
That sounds painful.
So I was fine. So I stand up and I start running to the swings, and my girlfriends are Kate, stop. And I stop and I look down and there's blood
gushing down your leg?
Down my legs, down my arms.
You didn't feel it?
Like, because it was adrenaline. I was like,
painful.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were just dumb things that were like, well, that was really dumb. But I didn't have anybody else to blame for that. Everybody else wasn't jumping out of the car and I jumped out with them. I was the one. I was the dummy.
Oh my gosh, if my child came home and told me that they rode in the bed of a truck on a street or sitting on top of a convertible, I would lose my mind. All I can think is head injury. Injury.
I think we are so much more, I don't know, like, oh, we got to keep them safe.
Bubble wrap.
Than we were in the 90s. Or in my experience, we were doing all kinds of wild stuff.
I just don't think our parents had any clue. And I feel like as parents now, we've seen way too many movies. So now we have all the clues.
We're tracking them kids on Life 360.
Yes, we are.
I'm like, where are you? What are you doing?
I love Life 360 when it shows you the shoe. Yeah. They're walking instead of driving is my favorite.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I completely agree. But we did not do those things in the bubble. I don't even think my friends had driver's license. Like, I don't remember riding in cars with friends. Because my parents were like, no, you can't ride in their car. I don't know what kind of a driver they are.
You also don't remember really anything from your childhood. So.
That's true. That's true. Okay, so the whole idea of if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you, has to go with this idea of peer pressure and temptation. That is still very prevalent in today's world.
Yeah.
All of our kids are experiencing that. And peer pressure has a lot to do with what others think about us. It's all about whose opinion we value and who we surround ourselves with. So if we have a great supportive community of people that are making good choices, then hey, that could be good peer pressure.
Yeah.
But of course, as parents, we are worried about the bad peer pressure. Those influences around our kids that we know are not giving them wise advice. And so we want our kids to make wise choices. I feel like with my kids, this is a conversation we have on the regular. My daughter's in 6th grade. She's constantly coming home talking about what happened at lunch or at recess. And we're having to talk through these ideas of, okay, did you feel pressure to be a part of that? Were you able to walk away and say no? Mm-hmm. And so just a couple ideas I have, especially for those kind of situations. They're at school or they're at a friend's slumber party or something like that. Number one, we have to teach our kids to be assertive. They have to be able to say no. No, thank you. No, I'm not going to do that. That's not for me. They have to have the ability to confidently say no.
Which is hard. Like, I think it was hard in our day and age.
Yes.
But I think, like, especially now, if you're talking about situations where someone's wanting to make a choice that doesn't align with their beliefs, or they're listening to something or watching something, we live so much more in a culture of everybody has to accept everyone.
Yeah. That by saying no, it feels like you're like, I don't know.
You're the terrible person.
Yes, exactly.
Because you're saying that doesn't align with my beliefs. Right. It's very backwards, and I think we know that, but it can be really hard for our kids.
Yes. I also think we need to know your limits. So before you even get in a situation, you have to know what you are and aren't going to do. And honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is gossip, because I feel like that's just, all the kids are doing it. And I'm really trying to teach my daughter, just don't participate in that.
Yeah.
So before you even get to the lunch table, just go ahead and say, you know what, I'm not going to talk about anybody else. So if somebody does start talking about somebody else, I'm going to say, nope, I don't want to participate, and just get yourself out of the situation.
Yeah.
Which is another one, just get away.
Yeah.
Like, get up and walk away from the group, walk away from the table. And then the number one thing that I tell her all the time, and my parents told me this growing up too, is blame me. The mom. Mm-hmm. Like, you can always say, oh, guys, I'm sorry, my mom won't let me.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? My mom would be really upset if she knew I was doing that. Like, put the blame on mom and dad, because sometimes it is hard for them to say no with their own conviction, but to, hey, borrow my conviction for that situation and just say, no, my mom wouldn't let me.
Well, and for our high school kids and for my middle school kid, we came up with a code word. So if they call and ask to do something, if they use that code phrase, then I know they just need me to say no.
Exactly.
So that I can be the out. And so I love that.
Yes. But this is the thing. Not always are our kids in situations where they can choose whether or not to take themselves out of the situation. So one of the things that I found, especially with my boys that started in middle school, was locker rooms.
Yeah. Oh, that one's tough.
Buses, like when you're coming home from an away game and you're stuck on a bus with a bunch of teammates. Or even like birthday parties, where guys get a little, I don't know, like courageous and curious and they want to do things they shouldn't. I feel like there are times where our kids are in situations where it's not so easy to just get out of the situation.
Yeah.
And so something that I thought was so interesting is teaching our kids to be more comfortable when they're uncomfortable.
Okay.
The more comfortable you are being uncomfortable, the less of a hold peer pressure will have on you. I know this is kind of confusing, but when we get uncomfortable, we tend to shrink back.
Yeah.
And not speak up for ourselves and not be assertive.
Yeah.
Because we're not really sure what to do or how to do it. But if I can teach my kid, you know what, there are times where you're going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to know what to say. You're not going to understand what's going on around you. You're going to feel like, man, I don't need to be here, but I don't know how to get out. Mm-hmm. So just go ahead and expect that those situations are going to come.
That's good.
And when you get in that situation, just remind yourself, Mom told me what to do. Mom and Dad talked to me about this. I really think I know what's right in the situation, and just do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I think even as adults, we get in situations like that still.
For sure.
Where we didn't expect to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then when it happens, it's like it takes us off guard.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to react.
Oh, for sure. And because I don't want to make other people uncomfortable, which is so funny. Like, my main motivating factor is I don't want anyone else to feel bad.
Right.
But then I'm stuck in this situation feeling bad.
Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, looking back, you're like, well, I probably could have just excused myself and gotten out of there.
And that's the thing. We tend to think after the situation what we should have done or what we should have said. And part of that's going to be a learning experience for our kids. Mm-hmm. I mean, I really think, just like you talked about with your friends in that car, I mean, you learned something from that.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
And you learned something in a greater degree than if somebody had just said, hey, Kate, don't do that.
Dude, I did, because those wounds hurt for weeks. You know, it hurt to take a shower. It was a lot. And I think that was a season of my life where one of the things I was learning is that I was a little bit impetuous.
Yes.
And that actually followed me into my early 20s. And I didn't know that that was something that the Lord needed to refine in me, but I didn't always have. It's funny, I'm telling you the story and I'm thinking about my own teenagers and how frustrated I get with them. But I was also a dum-dum, you know? And I did lack some wisdom,
Yes.
And so you do a few dumb things and then you go, oh, that was really dumb.
Yes.
And you do other dumb things and you don't feel the consequences, and you look back later and you go, thank God. Like, by the grace of God.
Right.
I know I drove that car 100 miles an hour and I didn't crash or get a ticket. That was a really dumb thing for a 16-year-old to do. And I'm just so thankful that, God spared me.
Well, and I don't know as a parent that there's like this perfect line that you can draw where you know whether or not to let your kid experience some of those foolish decisions versus feeling like you need to bubble wrap them all the time.
Yeah.
Because I do think a lot of times, myself included, I learn better when I make a mistake. Yeah. And then I grow from it.
No, I think you're bringing up some good things. First of all, that we don't need to be afraid of being uncomfortable.
Right.
And we don't need to be afraid of making mistakes. We are going to make mistakes. And so nobody should beat themselves up, or, it shouldn't be the end of the world. It's like, this is part of the growing experience.
Yes.
I will say one of the things that you brought up, though, is you said, like a kid talking to themselves and being in an uncomfortable situation and saying, my mom and dad have talked to me about this. I know what to do.
Yeah.
I think there are a few things that I've kind of learned along the way of things I do need to talk to my kids about that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of.
Yes.
So like, for example, we have really held sleepovers.
Yeah.
It's a
it's a
very
good one.
small group of people that our children are allowed to spend the night at. Very small.
Right.
Handpicked. But even in those situations, and that opens up a little bit more in middle school when you've got like, it's a girls' slumber party.
Well, birthday parties. They love to have slumber parties for their birthday. And then you're bringing in friends that you may not necessarily know the best.
Right. It really may be, the family, but then there's all these other
people.
friends that have come in. And so, we had to have some very strategic conversations with the kids going into those situations.
Right.
A few of those are, hey, you guys may want to watch a movie. If it is not a movie that has been approved by mom or dad, you need to give us a call or a text.
That's right.
So that we can make sure that is safe for you.
Yes.
And my kids have been faithful to do that, surprisingly.
Yeah.
That they have honored us in that. And I've had parents text me and say, that was amazing that she reached out to check and make sure it was okay. We talked to them about, hey, listen, we're not looking at anybody else's device when we are at someone's house.
Yes.
And so, ideally, we're typically having a conversation with the parents hosting the slumber party of like, hey, what's the plan with other people's devices? Are we going to have,
especially after you go to bed?
Yes. Are the kids going to have access to other people's phones? And honestly, I would say as parents, we need to not be afraid of having that uncomfortable
that's
conversation.
So good. Because I would like stop myself and go, oh, can I ask that?
Yeah.
Or should I? Yes.
Yeah.
That's so good.
So before we had a girl, it was her first ever sleepover, and she was going to spend the night at our house. And the mom said, hey, we'd really like to do this. I have a few questions for you first.
That's great.
And so she asked me that question about the devices.
Yes.
She asked me where the girls would be sleeping. And she asked who else was going to be in the home.
That's amazing.
And I just was like, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And because she was willing to do that, that made me feel more free to ask the same questions.
Correct.
And then I think it just kind of helps us all create this culture of like not being afraid to ask. And then maybe it also helps those parents think about those things. Like, okay, what are we going to do? Does everybody turn their phone in?
Because they may not have. They just needed somebody to like prep them to go, oh, that's actually a great thought.
Yeah. And talk to the kids about, okay, what if you're at the house and everybody decides, oh, we're going to sneak out at 1 a.m. What is your response?
Yes.
And just talking through a few of those things with them, I think ahead of time can really just help to allay, maybe even talking to them about changing.
Yep.
Hey, what you might need to change into your clothes. What would you?
Yes.
Just
what would you be more comfortable? Yeah.
Some things like that.
Yeah.
And then, hey, if you do feel uncomfortable, let's talk about what the plan is.
Yes.
So I just think, to me, sleepovers is a big one.
Yeah.
But just some of those things where our kids could be getting into uncomfortable situations, kind of helping give them some tools for those of us who know the kind of things that they might get into.
Well, and from a parent who has sent her kid to a sleepover and not asked those questions, and then them come home the next day and you found out stuff that you were like, oh, that was not great.
Yeah.
To kind of go, okay, I've got to reel it back in. We have to start over.
Yeah.
It's okay that we didn't do this properly the first time. We're going to do it right the next time.
There you go. That's great.
And I think too, for your kid to have the freedom to call you at any point and say, I think I want to come home. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. Just because you go to a sleepover doesn't mean you have to actually spend the night.
Exactly.
Hang out with your friends, and then when you're ready, come on home.
Yeah.
But that's a great conversation to have. And I do think that that's an area where I've been uncomfortable as a parent because I'm not exactly sure, because your kid wants to so badly and they're just begging.
Yeah.
But there's like a part of you on the inside that's like, I don't think this is a great idea.
Yeah.
And so you want to make them happy and let them go. But then for me, the next morning I was like, bummer. I missed an opportunity.
It is a bummer.
Yes.
Yeah. But then again, to your point, we're going to make mistakes.
We're going to make mistakes.
And so we all learn from it, and there's
right.
not shame. We just learn and grow.
Exactly. So some scriptures that I think that the Bible lends to these great conversations with our kids about the idea of peer pressure and temptation. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, bad company corrupts good character.
Yeah.
And, you might have a kid that's like, but Mom, I have to sit next to this kid in class, or I have to play a sport with this kid. Yes, and that's difficult because you have to navigate trying to be kind and loving while also making wise choices for yourself and not letting their influence rub off on you. Proverbs 12:26 says, the righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. When we are encouraging our kids to really pick those people they want to have slumber parties with and they want to do life with, to choose kids that they have never been in a situation where the kid has asked them to do something that makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes you can learn a lot about someone by the way that hey, let's go do this, or nobody will know, or you don't have to tell your parents. Those are red flags.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Proverbs 13:20, walk with the wise and become wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into this whole conversation about temptation, because temptation is typically to do something that is not wise.
Yeah.
And so you can be in situations with friends, and honestly, I think sometimes even good friends that are just making poor choices, where they're asking you to do something that is not going to be a wise decision. It reminds me of magnets. If you've ever held magnets together and they're attracted to each other, the closer you put the magnets to each other, the more you feel that pull.
Right.
And it's grabbing each other and it's bringing you in closer.
Yeah.
I think that's the same with temptation. You know, when you're standing really far off from temptation, it's easier to say no. But the closer you get to it, the more it does look fun, and maybe nobody will find out. But everybody else is going to get to do it, and then I'm not.
Yeah.
That temptation starts to suck you in. So it's really trying to help our kids see, if you'll just stand back from it, you can say no much easier than if you're, just like with the bridge, standing on the very edge.
That's really good. I love
that cliff. So the closer we get to temptation, the more likely we're pulled in its direction. And wanting to be accepted by a crowd, being able to fit in, or feeling like you want somebody to invite you to the group, those are all things that can drag us into choices we never wanted to make in the first place.
Yeah.
The Bible says no temptation has overtaken you except such as common to man. But God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will also make a way of escape. But here's the question that I have, because I think that sounds like, oh, that sounds so good. But if you keep putting yourself in a place of temptation, I don't know that that way of escape is as flashing light there as it is the first time.
Well, because to your point, the pull toward the bad choice gets stronger as you get further away from like your starting point with it.
Yes.
And so you really do. That pull gets really strong, and it gets harder and harder to see your ways out.
Well, and I think it numbs you a little bit. The more you're around something, the more you don't see all the detrimental sides of it.
Yeah.
And especially if you see kids participating in something and they're getting away with it, or it's not harming them.
Yeah.
I mean, these seem like really difficult conversations to have with our kids, because we almost wonder, are they mature enough to make these choices? But I think Kate and I would both say, have the conversation.
Yeah.
Like, don't shy away from it and think they're not ready.
Yeah.
You can use different language around certain conversations to begin helping your kids to see just the opportunities that are laid out before them and what really are the wise and unwise choices.
For sure. And I think we can drip that stuff in when they're little, because we think about like little toddlers dealing with each other not being nice to one another. And so we can talk to our toddlers about, hey, we are a friend to everyone, to your 5-year-old kindergartner. We make space for everyone. We're a friend to everyone. And if you ever see someone not being nice to someone else and not letting them be a part of the group, this is what we do, so that we can drip in little pieces where you might face some friction here. This might be uncomfortable. And as you sit in that uncomfortable situation where you're having to stand up for a kid who's being mistreated, it starts to put some reps in them.
Yes.
So they start to build a little muscle of like, hey, I know how to stand up for what is right.
Yes. And so don't ever assume that your kid is going to know the right thing to do in the situation.
Yeah.
Because I do think, just like Kate said, when you're in those uncomfortable situations in the beginning, you don't.
Yeah.
All thinking goes out the window. You just are uncomfortable and don't know what to say or do. So thinking about it ahead of time will help your child to know what is right.
Yeah.
And so that means we have to have conversations with our kids about stuff like this. So just a few tips that I think you can begin using, just like Kate said, dripping in amongst the conversations that you have with your kids, to be open about your own experiences with peer pressure. Like, have you told your kids about the convertible?
I don't know if I have. I don't know if I've told them that
Might
story.
be time.
Yeah.
But think about some of the areas where maybe you felt tempted growing up, within reason.
For sure.
And give them an insight into, Mom and Dad aren't perfect. We struggled too.
Yeah.
When I went to a slumber party, this is what,
Yeah.
which they did want to toilet paper people's houses. And I did participate in that.
Listen, it was fun back then. It wasn't, I don't know. I've wanted to take my kids to go TP house. I think it's fun. But my husband is like, Kate, I think you can get arrested for that now. So
No way.
I think you can. But I told him, I was like, I would call the parents and be like, hey.
So that's what you do. You just call ahead.
Yeah.
Because I remember our house getting TP'd when I was growing up, and my dad would just make me go out the next morning and take it all down.
Yeah, well, or you call the parent and you say, we'll come back the next morning. The girls are spending the night. They thought it would be fun.
Yes.
We'll come back in the morning. We'll clean it up, you know.
Yes.
I will say with my middle school daughter, they did have a situation where I was starting to see them kind of gang up. You know, I hate that middle school girls do this, but they'll pick a girl that is the pariah of the group for that week or something. Right. And everybody else will kind of gang up on her. And it's like she can't do anything right. I know. Listen, and I remember falling into that trap as a middle school girl myself.
Yes.
And I will never forget one time being on a call, and you could like add people in and people wouldn't know or whatever. Like, well, it was called like a conference call. I mean, it's like from a landline, you know what I mean? And you could be quiet on there and, set somebody up. And I remember falling into the trap of one of my girlfriends saying, let's call and set this girl up and see what she'll say on the phone. I know.
Heartbreak.
And I look back on it and there are things in your life that you regret.
Yes.
I mean, it still gives me a pit in my stomach, you know, just even thinking about that.
Yes.
But having to tell Lydia, it was disgusting. I regretted it so much.
Yes.
And so when you are tempted to kind of get into these little girls work themselves up into this.
They do.
She deserves it. Or like some really gross
things we thought we would never say. Yes.
Yeah. And so I have, told those kind of stories. But I do think being honest at the level that they're ready for it and with the information that they can handle is definitely helpful. My son, when he went into high school, his sophomore year, he started asking me questions about choices I made in high school and stuff. And so I did start being more honest of like, I did this, I went through this dark season and this is what it looked like for me. And I'm never like, it was so fun. Because looking back, I'm like, that was a waste of time with those dumb choices I made.
Well, and what that does is that builds rapport with your child so that if they were to make a dumb choice, they would maybe come tell you more readily.
Yeah.
Because they know mom and dad weren't perfect.
Yeah.
So it's okay, mom and dad, and make sure you make them feel safe in that space to say, no matter what happens or what you do, you can always come tell me.
Yeah.
And we'll figure it out together, you know?
Yep.
Okay, next thing, teach them to say no. And I talked to you about that at the beginning. Just give your kid permission to say no. Even if it's a situation where maybe it's really not that bad, but they feel uncomfortable, just say you can say no.
Yeah.
You don't have to play that game.
Yeah.
You don't have to be part of that conversation.
Yep.
You don't even have to sit at that table.
Yeah.
Like if you need to go ask the teacher to move you, just do it. It's okay for you to say no.
Yeah.
Talk to them about how the decisions they're making now could impact their future. So this is really important for our teenagers to start to cast their vision down the road a little bit.
Dude, especially with the internet.
Yes.
With the internet, things that get captured on the internet. Like, thank you, Lord, that we did not have social media when we were growing up,
Yes.
Because those things can come back to haunt you. And I definitely have talked to the kids about, like, don't put anything on paper or write anything out that you wouldn't feel confident standing behind no matter who was going to read it.
That's right.
Do not do it. Because they can be so quick to fire off a text and, so quick to blast somebody. And it's like, no, you want to be able to feel good about anything that is going to represent your written communication.
Yes. And you have to help them see that because their mind is not going to naturally go to that place.
Yeah.
So because we are adults and we've lived longer, we've had to interact with people that have choices in their past that are now resurfacing for different things. And so it's really important for us as parents to say, okay, let's just think in 5 years when you're headed off to college and you had to turn in a resume for something, is this what you would want them to see?
Yeah.
Or in 10 years when you're applying for your first job, or even like, when you're starting to date the girl you want to marry, do you want to have a string of girlfriends or boyfriends in your past just because you thought it would be fun?
Yeah.
Like just questions to get them thinking about what's coming. Yeah. And along with that future thinking is just talking about the risks. Being really open and honest about, listen, if you decide to drink, here's what could happen.
Yeah.
You could get arrested.
Yeah.
If you decide to look at porn, here's what could happen.
Yep.
You could become addicted.
Yeah.
If you decide to cheat on that test in school, you could get kicked off the football team.
Yeah.
Like, don't mix words with some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because I do think kids have a feeling of invincibility. I can get out of anything. It's not going to hurt that bad.
For sure.
It's okay for you as a parent to say, hey, let's just talk really about like what could happen.
Yeah.
Now, of course, as a parent, we pray it doesn't happen to our kid. But all of us have watched the news, and we've all seen it happen to other kids.
Yes.
And so we want to make sure that we're at least giving our kids the right information to make their choices.
Love that.
Because that's what it really comes down to at the end. It's their choice.
Yeah.
You and I can only control them for so long. Yeah. And there comes a point, especially, with my son last year being a senior and then heading off to college, I had to give him the freedom to make some of his own choices in that regard and say, listen, I'm going to be here, but if you make a bad choice, we're going to have to figure a way out, and the consequences, I can't get you out of some of those.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to send your kids off into adulthood not having had the opportunity to own their decisions.
There you go.
And then to have to navigate the consequences.
Yes, because there is a danger in bubble wrapping them too much that they're not prepared when they leave the home. We do have to, I think they call it like the steamroller mom or whatever. There is this danger of a steamroller mom that goes out ahead of them and paves the way, makes sure everything's taken care of so their road is smooth. We do want them to experience some friction. We do want them to have to use those muscles so they get strong. And I think, you've brought up a good point that we as their parents have to calibrate our expectations and remember they are going to make mistakes.
Yep.
And actually those mistakes are opportunities.
That's exactly right.
And opportunities for them, opportunities for us.
Yes.
They have an opportunity to grow. We have an opportunity to lean in.
Right.
And so that we wouldn't be surprised by them, but we would let those things help them learn.
Yes. I think that if Greg could go back to that cliff diving or cliff jumping with our son, he would be like, I can't believe I let him do that. But then on the other side of it, he was like, yeah, but it's a core memory now for him and I that we jumped off this cliff together.
Yeah.
So moms and dads, we all remember our teenage years. We all made choices that we could wish we could go back and not do. But I do think that we have an opportunity as parents now to help our kids see down the road a little bit and really choose their friends wisely. And then within those friendships, make wise choices for their life.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Moms, we love you. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. And hey, if your girlfriends decide to jump off a bridge, we know Kate would.
I'm not jumping off a bridge, bro.
You said you jumped off a cliff.
A cliff. I will jump off a cliff. I'm not. A bridge feels dark.
Cliff jumpers to the left with Kate. Bridge jumpers to the right with Rebecca. We love you, moms. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.